And this is a chapter discussing what we might call kingdom parables. And these are all these are all parables that talk about different aspects of the kingdom. Some of them are similar, but they all have a different point that they want to make. And I think one of the things that we need to be sure that we do is that when we look at a parable, let's first understand what Jesus wanted us to understand from this parable. That's the first thing we need to do. And secondly, if we want to make some application, good and well. But let's first understand what Jesus wanted us to understand. You remember in the parable of the sower, what did Jesus want us to understand? There are different hearts of man that the seed fall on, right? You know, sometimes people call it, let's call it the parable of the soils. What did Jesus call it? The parable of the sower. So that's what I want to call it, right? I know that's kind of nitpicky, but that's what Jesus called it. That's what I want to call it. So we call it the parable of the sower. And so the idea is the sower sowed, and what happened? The seed fell on what? Various types of soil, various types of hearts. But today we're going to be looking at the parable of the tares. The parable of the tares is found in Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 through 30. And Jesus then is going to explain it beginning in verse 36. But notice, as we begin looking at this parable, notice there, verses 24 and 25, it says, "Another parable said he before them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man that sowed good seed in his field. And while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares also among the wheat and went away." Now this parable has a lot in common with the parable of the sower because both are based upon the practice of sowing seed, right? And both of these parables are explained by Jesus. He says that the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man that sowed good seed in the field. But then during the night, an enemy sowed tares among the good seed. This was both a vicious and a cowardly act. It did the enemy no good, but did great harm to the victims. Let's think about that word tare for a minute. Tares. Tares is a term for a grassy weed resembling wheat, generally identified as darnel. And it is difficult to detect because it looks a lot like the wheat as it springs up. And the roots intertwine with the... Have you ever been in a garden and you pull up a weed and next thing you know your tomato plant comes up too? That's what happens here. They intertwine. And what's interesting to me also is that the Hebrew equivalent of this word is zonin, from the Hebrew word zan, Z-A-N. And the word zan means nauseous. One dictionary defined it as, the seed is like wheat but smaller and black, and when mixed with wheat flour causes dizziness, intoxication, and paralysis. I got to thinking, by way of application, in this world, we see bad seed that's been sown, and we see the nauseous effect that it has on our world. Just look around you, right? Sometimes the things that are going on in this world makes you want to just upchuck, don't it? I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about that too much before we eat later on, but it makes you just want to throw up. We live in a nauseous world. And you know why? Because a bad seed was sown in the world. But look now at verses 26 through 30. Jesus goes on to say, or the parable goes on to say in verses 26 through 30, but when the blade sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. And the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst thou not sow good seed in thy field? Whence then hath it tares? And he said unto them, An enemy hath done this. And the servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he saith, Nay, lest haply while ye gather up the tares, ye root up the wheat with them. But let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather up first the tares, and bind them in the bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Here is illustrated and stated again that is so often in the Scriptures, and that is the principle of we reap what we sow, right? When you sow wheat seed, you get. When you sow tares, you get tares. Kind of reminds you, turn over in your Bibles to Galatians chapter 6. We sometimes call this idea the law of the harvest. In Galatians chapter 6, notice there verses 7 and 8. Paul said, Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth unto his own flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth unto the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap eternal life. What? We reap what we sow. The law of the harvest. You know, even the disciples here understood this law, hence they said, Sir, didst thou not sow good seed in thy field? Then where are these tares coming from? Because they knew what? You reap what you sow. So evidently what? Somebody sowed tares among the wheat. It was apparent. And this distinction was early. Now, carry the idea of bearing fruit. Wheat can be considered bearing fruit when it comes up. But also it says, let them what? When they saw the fruit, it said, do what? Let them grow together. So early they saw the difference. But then he says what? Let them grow together. Yes, they look similar. But as they begin to get a little higher, then what? Uh-oh, we got trouble here. And then they kept growing. And when it came time for harvest, what was going to take place? There was going to be a separation. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that more in a moment. But I want you to notice that the distinction is seen early. The fruit was apparent very early, which was which. But I want you to notice also in this parable, the seed, there are two sowers, right? There are two seeds, one field. Two sowers, two seeds, one field. So the counsel of the master was to allow them to grow together until the harvest, at which time they could be safely separated without causing undue damage to the good crop. So if you go in there, man, there's some tares right there. I'm going to pull that baby up, and up comes the wheat. So he says what? Don't do that. Don't do that. Because you're going to damage the good crop. Then the wheat could be gathered into the barns, and the tares could be placed together and burned. And the wheat would be what? Be gathered in the barn. What does this mean? What does it mean? Well, aren't you excited that we have an inspired interpretation? Jesus explains to us what this means. Now, here's what I want us to do. I want us to accept the Lord's explanation. Wouldn't that be the right thing to do? If the Lord says, this is what this means, then guess what? This is what this means. Does that mean that we can't make some application? No. But the first thing we need to do is what? What did Jesus say about it? So, look in verse 36. Then he left the multitude and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, explain unto us the parable of the tares of the field. It's interesting that they did not ask him to explain the two preceding parables, the parable of the mustard seed and the parable of leaven. I think they got that one. But they were having trouble with this one. And so they were asking about it. And so their desire of the disciples was that they get an explanation from the Lord about what this parable is all about. But you know, today, even though the Lord explains exactly what this parable means, there are a lot of people who don't accept it. They don't agree with it. Or they make an application that does not fit. And I will show you how some people use that to teach a false doctrine. We'll talk about that in a moment. But let's look now. In verses 37 to 39, he is going to explain unto us what this parable is all about. Beginning in verse 37, he says, and he answered and said, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. And the field is the world. And the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. And the tares are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy that sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. So, when we look at this parable, he tells us that the sower is Christ, the Son of Man. He says that the good seed are the sons of the kingdom. That is, those who've obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered unto them, right? They are Christians. The seed was sowed in the world. And it produced what? The good seed was sowed into the world and produced what? It's our church, Christians. But also in the world there is produced what? Not so good. Tares are also sown in the world. Now I want us to hone in here for a moment on that phrase he says, the field is the world. This is where the seed is sown. It's sown in the world. We're going to see later that they pulled out of this field the good and the bad. Some have said, well, that's the church. They're pulling it out of. No, not in this parable. Now, when we get to the parable of the net, you're going to see what? Then they're going to be pulled out of the church, the good and the bad. But here, It's the world. Well, he talked about his kingdom. Well, and without me getting too far ahead of myself, is not this world God's kingdom? Is he not in control? If he's King of kings and Lord of lords, this is his kingdom. Kingdom is used in different senses in the Bible, right? Sometimes the kingdom refers to the church. Sometimes it refers to heaven. Sometimes the kingdom, even they thought the devil was the king of this world, right? Before we get too far on that, the field here is not the church. Listen to what Jesus said. He says what? The field is the world. Jesus said, the field of the world, the tares are gathered out of the same place in which they were planted. All right? The bad seed, the good seed are gathered out of the same place that they were planted. Jesus says they were planted where? In the world. All men, good and bad, are represented by the wheat and the tares. It represents all mankind. In the day of judgment, with all mankind, there's going to be what? There's going to be a separation. To say, and I've heard this over the years, some used it innocently and others have used it with an ulterior motive, saying Jesus is talking about the separation of people in the church, and he says they look so much alike that we don't quite know the difference in them, but God knows, and so he'll separate them at the end. Well, that sounds nice, but that's not what this parable teaches. Because he said that what? These are all in the world. The seed was sown in the world. He separates them from the world. And if it is the case, and it's not, that this separation was only in the church, what about all these people in the world where the bad seed was sown? We need to keep in mind that although we can make application, Jesus tells us what he's talking about. And every parable will have a predominant point. We make application on various things. Why do some people want to believe that this is the separating in the church? You know why people want to say that? They say that means you can't be involved in church withdrawing of fellowship because Jesus says what? I'll do the separating. Really? Which clearly contradicts what Jesus said in other passages. So he's not talking about that, we know, because Jesus would never what? He would never contradict himself. But the fruit of the world is going to be apparent. You can tell the difference. But in the church, who's going to do, in the world, God's going to do the separating, right? There's going to be a separation in the church too, but we're going to talk about that in the parable of the net. That's what that's all about. He says the tares are the sons of the evil one. The sower of these tares is the devil. The tares are the wicked that they have sown among the righteous in the world, and don't we see that every day? The tares of wickedness by the devil being sown in our world. These tares are the wicked that have been sown among the righteous in the world. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The devil's behind it. The harvest, he says, is what? The end of the world. That's when this is going to take place. The reapers, he says, are what? The angels.
That's two different uses of the word world, too. Verse 38 is cosmos. The verse number 39 is eon or age. So different use of the word world altogether.
And so what do we think about from that?
When you think about cosmos, you think about the universe, all things created.
The God, end of the world, which one is that one? Cosmos, the end of the world?
38 is cosmos.
The end of the world. I'm going to do some more thinking on that. But yes, it's very apparent, or not very apparent, but if you looked at the Greek, it's different words. We'll look at that more later. So, he gives what? Jesus says, this is what I'm talking about. Look at verses 40 through 42. And therefore the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and he shall gather out of his kingdom all things that cause stumbling and them that do iniquity, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay, some people are going to say, well, he's talking about the church, the kingdom here. Where was the seed sown? In the world. Where is he gathering out the harvest? Out of the world. But he calls it what? The kingdom. Why? Because he is what? He is the king, right, of this world.
So you don't think that when you might get into the parable of the virgins, in the parable of the kingdom, and half of them are in the kingdom?
No, because it doesn't really fit with the flow of the parable. We got to keep in mind when we're trying to understand what it means in the parable. Let's look at the flow of the parable and not all of a sudden in the middle of the parable change gears.
He rules. That's his kingdom.
Yeah.
God has given him authority over this world.
Yeah.
So whether or not people prove that or not in the world, God rules.
Yeah.
Christ rules this world.
It's bad to say Christ rules over this world. John tells us also the devil is the ruler over this world. There's an overlapping of these rulers. That's
Yeah.
why there's a war continually goes on.
And that's why there's going to be a separation. That's why there's tares in this world. So, and yes, sir. No, it is not the same kingdom as verse 43. I'm saying that the kingdom in verse 41 is the kingdom of this world, and those, when they are taken out of the kingdom and are righteous, they're going to be taken into the kingdom of their Father. So I'm saying that the kingdom of verse 41 is this earthly kingdom, and the kingdom of verse 43 is the heavenly kingdom. Verse 38 is the same. These are the sons of the kingdom. Now, okay, the sons of the kingdom are Christians. But these Christians became Christians. The seed was sown where? In the world, which produced sons of the kingdom, all right? And so this whole situation here is being described as what? Seed sown in the world. That's his whole point. That's how he began the parable, right? He says what? The kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that sowed seed in his field. So the whole crux of the parable is about what? Sowing seed in this world. And when you sow the seed from Christ, you're going to have what? You're going to have sons of the kingdom. When you have seed sown by the devil, you're going to have what? Sins of the world, right? But then he says, when the final day comes, I'm going to gather out of my kingdom. And I believe he's talking here about the world, because you're going to have Christians and what? non-Christians. Later on, in the parable of the field, he's going to talk most definitely about the church, because he's going to cast his net into the sea, which is the world. He's going to bring up the fish. But even then, there's going to be what? A separation there. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
To help me understand also, 24, what is that kingdom?
Verse 24. The kingdom of heaven. You're talking about the kingdom of heaven? He's talking about the church is like unto. The kingdom, all these parables are something to do with the church.
Yes. So, what did you say verse 38 was? Also the church?
Yes.
And then 41 was what?
41 is the world, and 43 is the church. The reason you say, well, how can you go back and forth on these kingdoms? That's what I'm saying. No, I'm not changing the definition. The definition is defined by the context.
The kingdom that we are in, the church,
Yes.
is in the world, and that world belongs to God, but we're in the world.
Yeah, and it is the world. God has.
That is the tares. He can take the church and the ones out in the world. Isn't that right?
That's the same harvest.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. But I'm saying here that this harvest has to do with him harvesting out of the world those who are not Christians and those who are Christians.
What is the difference between the tares and then the world?
What is the difference? The tares is a seed that's sown in the world. It's a seed. It's like the teachings of the devil, the ideas of the devil, the ways of the devil are being sowed in the world. Just like the seed of the gospel is sowed in the world. Have I thoroughly confused y'all?
What is, well, so, my understanding was in verse 38, the tares are people. So you have people being...
No. The tares are the seed. Well, the tares produce the fruit of the people, Just like when the good seed was produced, it produced what? Children of the kingdom. When the tares are sown, it produces what? Children of the devil. It's the product of the tares, just like the product of the seed of the kingdom is produced, right?
You're saying that...
It's just...
You're saying that the tares is just seed and then the world is the fruit of it?
Well, yeah, in a sense, the world is everything is here.
The world is creation. The world is neutral in this.
Yeah, the world is where the seed was sown. We are called, they're sometimes called worldly because they are of the world, right? The seed, now, I think we're trying to make it too hard. And maybe I didn't explain it well. It's a very simple principle. 2 sowers, 2 seed, 1 world, right? That's the basis of it. God tells us, he says, now notice, get out of your mind what you ever thought and go back to what he said in the very beginning. He says what? Here's what I want you to get from this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that sowed good seed in the field. That's what he wants us to understand about this parable, right? That is the crux of the parable. Seed is sown in the world. Good seed. But what happens? The devil comes along and does what? He sows bad seed in the world. And then he tells us, what are we going to do now, right? I know what let's do. Let's go around and kill every bad guy in the world. What does he say? No. They grow together. And then I will what? At the end, I will do the separating. You don't do this separating. I will do the separating. And those who are separated out of this world that are wicked, they're going to be bundled up and burned as hell. Those who are sons of the kingdom that are in this world, they're going to be what? He says they're going to do what? They are going to be in the kingdom of their Father. They're going to shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let's not try to put too much in a parable. So what's the basic idea? We have one world, two sowers, two seeds. They're sowed in the same world. You have good guys, to Christians, and you have the bad guys. Christ is going to come back and do what? He's going to separate all those from his kingdom, his world, his kingdom. There's going to be a separation. The Christians are going to go to the kingdom of the Father. The other ones are going to be burned. That's what the parable is. Huh? Oh, did you have something?
Generally, good hermeneutics, the basic principle of understanding parables is always that we keep them as simple as possible. And if the Lord said, this parable presents 1, 2, 3, we do not have the right to then extend that and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, we don't want to turn a parable into an allegory or something like that. It's a simple message.
As we often say with our understanding and comprehending the book of Revelation, we bring that same principle into this. And I just lost my thought.
Don't you hate that when that happens?
We must bring the principle. Go ahead.
All right. If it comes back to you, tell me. And and I think they realize, and he's pointing out also, that in this perfect world, there's people out there trying to spread bad seed, right? You got it now?
I said, as we understand this, we can understand 1, 2, 3 if the Lord explained it, not 4, 5, 6. And then whatever interpretation we draw from this, we cannot allow anything that contradicts any other part of Scripture.
Right. And the reason that I think that we need to take the Lord separating out of the church out of this equation is that he is going to do that in a parable in just a moment. He's going to talk about that very issue, pulling the faithful Christian and the unfaithful Christian, pull them out. That is in a different parable. This one is at large. Maybe, I don't know if I'm just not explaining it well or what, but to me it's fairly simple if we just don't overthink it. Don't overthink the parable. Yes, ma'am. Did you have something?
Yes, sir. When you're obeying the gospel, you're adding to the church.
Yes.
So all these good seeds are sown by the church, whether it's in a setting as we are now or if you're out evangelism. All of it evangelizing. To me, that's also simple.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
I think we're confused because when he uses the word kingdom, it's not always used in the same sense every time. And we allow that to kind of fog our memory a little bit, I think, on it. And we understand that there are lots of words that are used differently. Like in a moment, we're going to talk about, well, we're spending a lot more time than I thought we were on this one. But anyway, and that's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind you calling me into question, because if I'm wrong, you know what I want? I want to show you where I'm wrong, because I want to be right. I want to be right. Now I forgot. Oh, yeah. The parable of the leaven. How many different ways is leaven used in the Bible? So you have to do what? How is it used in the context? The same way is true with the kingdom. The same way is true with, I don't know, nothing comes to my mind, but there's other words like that. The world. So we need to think about the context in which it's being used. And so the whole crux of this is there is seed being sown in this world. There's good seed and bad seed. And in the end, God's going to separate that, the good from the bad. That's the parable. That's the parable.
I also kind of need to think about that because Christians aren't in the world, maybe we're pulling the judgment off where maybe more can,
They did say that we could tell the difference.
And that's what I wrote down, the aspect of the church being easily distinguished from the world.
Yeah.
That if you're paying attention, you can tell the difference.
At the very first, it may not be, but it don't take long till when? That you can see the difference. We can see the difference. We can tell when the devil has sown seed and when the Lord has sown seed. We can tell the difference. It's being sold in the same world. But God's going to do the separating.
Really what this is talking about is the two seeds. What Jesus is sowing, what the devil's sowing. They're both teaching. And so Jesus is sowing good teaching and the devil's sowing bad teaching. When you think about a lot of denominations, some things they get right. When you start at some basic stuff, Jesus is God. A lot of them get that right. But as they grow up, you see how they diverge from what the good teaching is. So you can easily tell the difference between those.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. That's one aspect of an analogy you can make. What?
Backing off of what you said a while ago, there are false religions who teach that if you do not submit to their Islam, for instance, take them out. Jesus never taught us to do that.
No.
We're a voluntary army. We don't need to be coerced.
The Lord's going to do the separating. Whether it be in the church or whether it be in the judgment. Let me put that in forward. In the judgment, God's going to do the separating of the world and also of the church, right? He does the separating. Now, that does not mean that we cannot withdraw fellowship, because that would clearly contradict what he said in other passages, right? But he's talking about here, final judgment. Parable of the net, final judgment. Here, there's a separation in the world. In the parable of the net, that we're going to look at next week, separation in the church. Right? Two different aspects of the kingdom. Everything in this chapter deals with the kingdom, the church, but different aspects of it.
I was going to say it's important in the first two parables that we see the emphasis that he puts on Satan and his doings, and the fact that he's playing offense and defense.
Yeah.
The parable of the sower, he's trying to take away the word from those that are getting the good seed. And we get this parable, he's actively sowing a different seed, but we see that all around us through.
Leave it to a football player to make that analogy. Offense and defense. Exactly right. But you're right.
Doing everything he can to get more players.
And so here we have there's a warning here. I mean, look, be on the lookout, right? Be on the lookout. Let's read 42 to 43 together as we conclude this one. And the Son of Man, verse 40 to 43, and therefore the tares were gathered and burned up with fire, so it shall be at the end of the world. The sons of man shall be sent forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom, and I believe that to be his territory, the world, Christians in the world, all things that cause stumbling in them to do iniquity. And shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He that hath ears, let him hear. Separation from the world. Christians, non-Christians. I mean, there's only two. Either you're a faithful New Testament Christian or you're not, right? There's no in-betweens. Two are gathered out at the end, at the very end. The Lord makes that distinction. He does the separating. We can tell the difference, but the Lord does the separating in the end. We have now, and we'll just kind of mention a few things here. But I want to mention this real quick. The parable of the mustard seed. Have you ever seen a mustard seed? They're pretty teeny weeny, aren't they? And he talks about here how that this mustard seed grows up to be a tree big enough to where what? Birds light in them. You know what can I say dingbats? Is that a bad word, dingbat? I don't think so. Would say, they say that means all the different denominations that sit in the branches of the Lord's church. That's a bunch of bunk, isn't it? From a small beginning, big things happen. Daryl and Dink, how big was BCS when it first got started? 20 people?
Ask Ginger.
Ginger? 9. That's the mustard seed. Look at us now. What's happened? I mean, we get 180, 200. The other day we had, 200 and what? That's the principle of the mustard seed. All right, till next time.